Hey guys, welcome to another episode on the MoneyfitMD show, podcast, YouTube, wherever you're watching from. You are in for a treat because today I'm going to be introducing you and interviewing an amazing woman physician who is a primary care doctor. And if I may be as bold to say, it's really defied a lot of odds and given all the fingers and toes to the stereotypes around family medicine. And I've known her for a while in the social media world, and it is truly, truly just my honor and deep pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Jennie Eckstrom. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be here, Latifat.
So we're gonna go right straight in. I have a question for you, and it is, why did you choose to almost like defy the odds when it comes to the stereotype around family medicine docs?
It's a great question. And I don't know that I was ever intending to defy the odds. I was that kid who wanted to be a doctor, and it just flowed through, like, went to undergrad, went to med school, went to residency, was invited to come back to a community near my hometown to practice medicine. And it was just what I did. And it wasn't until I was honestly probably about 7 years into practice that I truly realized what we were doing here. At that time, there were still quite a few independent clinics. This was before the hospitals were buying up all of the primary care clinics because of all of the provider-based reimbursement that was happening in the hospital. So it was just a job. Not just a job, but it was back near my family. I was doing all the things. I was doing full spectrum, delivering babies. I had my own 2 babies. I came to practice with a 3-month-old and then had my second daughter a couple of years later. And it wasn't until about year 7 or 8 that I was like, whoa, wait a second. What am I doing here? Is this what I want to be doing? And really, what do I want to do?
Let's go back. Did you grow up with family in medicine? Like, how did you? Because most times when people are going through their training, especially now, most people think of employed positions, but you did not go with that route. What led you to medicine, and what led you specifically to deciding that you wanted to kind of be your own boss?
So to answer your question, I'm the only physician in my family, but I'm third or fourth generation college graduate. I think I'm third generation. My grandparents, my parents, and then me. So third generation college graduate. So it was always understood that we would go to school. And as a grade schooler, wanted to be a pediatrician. I just wanted, and nobody told me I couldn't. In fact, I had this wonderful grandfather who was this beautiful supporter of any dream you had. And so of course it was going to happen. And so when you're buoyed by that kind of confidence without anybody, asking why it couldn't happen, then of course it's going to happen. And so I don't think I thought about independent medicine. I definitely thought about the relationships that I would have in medicine. And in fact, that's what took me from pediatrics to family medicine, because I realized that I was going to make these beautiful relationships with patients. And then at 18, they were going to go find another doctor. And that wasn't what I liked. If you've probably known me enough to know that I love people, I love the relationships with people, I love remembering their stories, and family medicine really has allowed me to do that. And so then in terms of the independent piece, I was doing rotations, and I had the opportunity to come and do a med student rotation at the clinic that I actually joined. So I did have the opportunity to see these physicians own their practice, own their business. I sort of had a little bit of a peek into the financials, and I knew I wanted to come back to Montana. And this was just a group that really seemed to sync up with who I wanted to be and the kind of practice I wanted to be a part of. And it just so happened that it was independent.
Got it. And how long have you been in that same practice?
So it's been the same one I joined from day one. So I'm now at 18 years, which is hard to believe because I'm not that old.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, you were like what, 17 when you finished training?
I mean, something like that.
So you mentioned that you looked at the financials. Most people going through training don't really think about financials of anything. So when you were looking at the financials, did you understand what you were looking at? How did you know what you were looking at? How did you vet them out from a numbers perspective?
Well, so part of our training, and I realize that this may not have been for everyone, but because I was a part of a rural training program, part of our education was learning how to code and making sure that we were capturing all of the right data so that we could be reimbursed. And we were responsible for then finding our coding and then doing our billing. I didn't realize that for the asset that it was. But then as I was doing rotations, now who are my partners were my attendees at that time, and they would talk about like, this is the number of patients that I need to see to take home what I'd like to take home. This is the overhead. So some of those, just some of that vocabulary that maybe we wouldn't have other heard, the idea of overhead, like what does it cost for me to have this many rooms, and how many patients do I need to see before I break even? And that was just integrated in that medical student rotation that I did. And then I came back and did a residency rotation as well before they asked me to join the practice. So it felt like this was a group of physicians who really understood how to run a business and really understand what it took for them to be able to take home what they wanted to. Now, when I saw some of the other bigger numbers, I didn't have a great idea of what percentage overhead meant. Um, so those were definitely lessons that I learned, but the financial aspect of medicine really coming to the forefront at the same time that we're providing care was really important for me to see.
That is unique. Most residency programs don't. In fact, most people almost demonize, to be honest, anything about numbers. I literally have people that have said they were talking to attendings about money in training. And one of them specifically said her evaluation was rated negatively because they're
Mm.
like, she talked about money. She must not like people or humans, or. So that is unique. And I'm so glad that that happened for you. I hope and wish it would happen more because that would mean that we actually are equipping physicians to be successful.
Well, and I will say that that coding piece, at least in primary care, has definitely gotten easy. I don't know if you remember the 1995 rules and the 1997 rules and how many review of systems, things that you needed to do. But certainly I have taken that so that we have medical students and PA students and nurse practitioner students that come through our practice, and I try to make that a part of their education as well, just so that they know that that's something that they need to be thinking of.
That's so good. So, at what point did real estate come into the picture for you?
Yep. So real estate actually began before I was even thinking about medical school. So my parents moved back to Montana. They were both born and raised in Montana, but they moved back in the 70s from the Bay Area when they realized they wanted to raise their family in Montana. So my dad's degree in physics didn't really translate to skill set that was needed in Montana. And so he became a contractor and started a building company in the 80s. And my mom was a real estate agent, teacher, sort of all of those things combined. And so some of my childhood memories were spent painting different apartment units that we had and helping flip different properties. And so it was like I was a scut monkey on a real estate crew before I was a scut monkey in medicine, honestly. And so I got the fortunate opportunity to really watch my parents go through some financial struggles, but then rebuild their world almost from ground up by purchasing properties, sweat equity, finding properties that had different zonings so that they could build extra units on them, and really have watched them turn that into their retirement income.
Wow. And are they retired now?
Yeah, they are. They're actually both late 70s and 80s. So,
That's so good.
yeah.
That's so good. I just noticed how much emphasis you've given the, I guess you would say, I don't know how you'd call it, the privilege of having access to that knowledge and information and that practicum, right? And I noticed you also give your grandfather credit, like this was just how we did things. And that was not going to be part of our conversation, but I'm just curious to see how that has impacted how you have raised your family and how you've passing on that knowledge in whatever capacity to the next generation.
Well, it's funny because, as we have invested, um, as we've invested in our own real estate and really wanting to plug everything in, the interesting comments that'll come from my children is, I don't know if all investors do this, but at a phase I went through like, ooh, we could spend that, or that could be an extra month of a mortgage, or that. And so at one point my children are like, are we poor? I'm like, no, but I just see the opportunity. And this is a time that we have to really plant seeds in a time where we don't need a whole lot. We don't need a big flashy house. We don't need, boats and all the things. I would rather see those dollars really be planted in a way that create a legacy. So I think if anything, it was that language that came through. Maybe sometimes a little bit to a fault, but now as we watch our children sort of go into their adulthood and really start to have to make some of those financial decisions on their own, I like to think that they were able to see that modeled in us, and sort of that paying attention to where dollars went translates over into decisions that they're making.
I think that is so good, and that's what I call generational wealth, because money can disappear,
Mhm.
but the values, the opportunity cost, the saying that, well, it's decisions we need to make and we choose to make, it's long-term benefit, and how can we make short-term sacrifices. Those are principles that, in my opinion, is more important than teaching your kids how to invest in the stock market,
Right.
right? Because we have young kids as well. And we were literally talking to my oldest today about, every once in a while, they know how we funded our travel,
Hmm.
but every once in a while, they ask questions about it still. And I bring them back to the memories. Like, you remember that property we went to go look at? That you're like, why do we have to go here after church on Sunday? I was like, yeah, that property is why we can earn when we're not away from you guys, right? And teaching kids those principles becomes the foundation of their money and wealth stories. So I love that you have that. And I love that you're passing that on to your kids. It's never going to be perfect, right? None of us is going to do this perfectly. But the intentionality is key, and it shows that you're doing that. So kudos to you.
Well, thank you. It's a work in progress.
Always a work in progress, always a work in progress. So you mentioned something earlier that actually reminds me of a conversation that prompted this recording that we're doing. And well, the conversation was about losing money
Hmm.
and value, and how our value as humans is not our dollars. And you talked about the fact that you've lost some money in the past.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that experience? What was it? What was surrounding it, to the level of, that you want to share with us?
Yeah, so it's interesting when so my husband and I have been together for 25 years. We've been married for 23. And he also comes from just a family full of beautiful legacy. And one of the legacy pieces that he brought into our relationship was an investment that his grandfather had made in a community bank in Washington. And his grandfather had given all of the grandchildren this seed money. And I remember when we were first having our conversations, we've been dating for maybe about a year at the time. And we started to have some of those financial conversations as we thought that, this relationship had potential to go somewhere. And he's like, I want to share with you that this is what I have, but this is something that I don't ever intend to touch. And so, and it was a really nice chunk, but in my mind was never mine. It was always his, and always that legacy. And so we held on to it. But one of the things my husband learned from his family, just like I learned about real estate, and they definitely had a real estate piece, but they were also very much invested in the stock market and in this stock that was in this bank that was given to him. And there was a very much a legacy of teaching, but through investing in the stock market, which had served my husband very well. And I would say, as much as I learned about real estate from my family, I learned about investment in stock from him. And so, we were investing at the time of the .coms. He actually was in before I was. I remember him encouraging me to do my first like Roth IRA as I was entering medical school. I'm like, I don't have $3,000. Do you understand that I'm like borrowing to like live right now? But once I got into residency and was making money, then we were investing, and he had this little nest egg and we were investing, and I was really taking my cues from him. The idea that you didn't really time the market, you just continued to get in. And at that point, there had not been any failures in the market. This was in early 2000s, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006. And so it was during this time period that we started to see the cousins, use those dollars, that legacy dollar, to like buy their first homes. And we're like, that's crazy. This is going to build and grow forever. Why would we want to touch this now? Right? It was never money that we had earned. We hadn't invested it, but it was always that potential that was there, and what would we do with it? And didn't feel like that house purchase was enough for us. And then the banking crisis happened. And as the stocks went down, we falsely thought these banks are too big to fail. Nobody is going to allow a bank to fail. And so if anything, we looked at it as an opportunity to buy. And so I remember like putting dollars in because I was like, well, look at what will happen from this. And that unfortunately was one of the banks that failed. And that those dollars were just gone. And it wasn't so much that it was money we had earned or that it was earmarked for anything, but it was just that possibility and that opportunity no longer existed. And I don't even know if the way that it was structured, because of how it was broken down, that we're even able to capture the loss of that. It was just those dollars were gone.
Wow. I mean, can be painful, right? And I would imagine with your husband, with the legacy piece, was it harder than painful?
I think if anything, I mean, he isn't one that dwells on regrets. And I think that's a blessing for us. But if anything, we started to look at those decisions that we maybe thought were hasty in terms of the folks that had used that to purchase homes, and that to say, gosh, should we maybe have done something different? And we know that looking back, you can't argue with the past, shoulda, woulda, couldas. But I think if anything, what that taught us is that maybe the stock market wasn't as safe as we had been inclined to believe.
So I have to ask you, were they diversified investments, or was it like stocks, individual stocks, or were they diversified?
Well, this specific legacy was in a individual bank, because it had been a bank that the family member had been involved in initially building from the ground up. And so probably at the time that those stocks were gifted, I have no idea what the value was, but it was something that had grown over time. and really, I think over the lifetime of my husband at that point. So when that piece was gone, it was just gone. We had other, um, we were fairly diversified, but definitely our financial sector stocks suffered greatly.
So when you guys had been doing your net worth calculation, did you calculate that as part of your net worth and then your net worth dipped significantly, or it was never part of your calculation?
At that time, I would say that my financial sophistication didn't even look at a net worth. I was still carrying medical student debt at that point. I still had some undergrad debt. Um, and so we didn't, we had a very simple budget. I was using Quicken at the time. So I knew where the dollars were going. I knew how we were getting our dollars to invest into like the Roth IRA. But I don't even think I started to do a net worth calculation till about 10 years ago because it
Got
was negative. It was an ugly negative number.
You're like, this is so ugly. We ain't gonna look. But I do have to say, you mentioned something earlier that you and your then boyfriend or fiance had been thinking about getting married. So you started having financial conversations. That is not common. Most people don't have financial conversations. So I don't think you're quite giving credit to the level of, maybe not sophistication, but you don't even need to be sophisticated. But that was very wise. But I'm curious what kind of conversations you guys were having, because there may be people listening right now that may even be like married 20 years and still haven't had financial conversations. Do you remember what kind of conversations y'all were having over dates?
Well, I think over dates, I remember actually having this conversation in my parents' living room. He was visiting, and it was, part of it was that I was bringing a lot of debt to the conversation. And this was before medical school. I mean, I'm a little old. I'm a little older than you are probably. I mean, this is before med school was crazy expensive. And I went to the University of Washington. And so my education was pretty affordable and I didn't have very much undergrad debt, but I still felt like I wanted us to both come into the relationship on equal footing. I didn't really look at or think about what my income potential was. I just was sort of looking at this space of like, I know I'm bringing debt to this. I want to make sure that I know what debt you might be bringing to this. And I didn't know at that point. And I think he sort of giggled at me a little bit at that point. Um, and those initial conversations about money were a little uncomfortable. I think in his family it wasn't terribly typical that you would talk about finances. The idea of investing and having those conversations and investment strategies was definitely out in the forefront, but having real frank conversations about the costs of things was not the case. And here I was in training and literally was living on student loans, you know. I didn't fund my whole family the way that you did. I probably could have been more frugal and creative with my dollars, but I certainly wasn't working. I certainly was. I just was allowing myself a little bit of comfort in that. And so as I think there was probably a little bit of discomfort of saying, I know we're going to come together and these are going to be my loans. And what does that look like? And I never got that sense of discomfort from him around that. But then it was I'd like to share with you why I'm not uncomfortable with this. And it was interesting because at one point a family member suggested a prenup, and I was like, that's not how this is going to work. Like, we're going to come into a place together. I think if we're going to have this relationship, it's going to be one that we're going to trust each other to work the best of our ability, the best of our skill set to create a a successful financial future for the two of us together, for our family as we go forward. I don't want this to be mine and yours. I really want us to start at the beginning when we really don't have a whole lot. Well, when I don't have anything, and maybe you have something, but what does it look like for us to start on on equal footing and move forward together?
You probably thought it was evil footing because you brought
My little slip there.
evil, evil dad with no. So some people would say that's risky, not having a prenup, especially thinking about the income potential that you have, but also for him in terms of what he had, including whatever it was from his family or not. Um, and, everybody gets to decide that. I actually don't think I've talked about this much, but we don't have a prenup either. I did not even know what a prenup was when we were getting married. I did not know what it was. And could we have gotten something? We could have, but it's a risk that we chose, or when I knew better or different, not better. It's a risk that I chose, but I'm grateful that it's a risk that I chose. And, you live with the consequence one way or the other. Our goal is to not divorce. And people will say, yes, nobody plans on that. Yes. I was listening to someone that said, marry someone that is worth losing 50% of your net worth on. I was like, okay, that's a good one. But this is a personal choice. And I honestly, if I think about it, if I know what I know now, I may have had a conversation about that. But we did not have lots of money conversations because I didn't know much about money. The only thing that I knew was I had debt. I did not know how much. And I said, yo, you don't have debt. I got baggage. But when we get the ring, it is no longer my baggage. It is our baggage. We're going to pay it off, but it's going to be more like you paying it off. And, I remember it just laughed. I was like, it's ours, so we're going to figure it out. And at some point, right? But I'm glad we had that conversation because there was that expectation of the fact that whatever liabilities we have, whatever assets we have, was going to be joint. And if he was a bad spender or horrible with finances, would I have married him? I'm not sure. I didn't know a lot, but for me, being responsible was important. And financial irresponsibility can actually be a thing. And so I don't know if that would have been unattractive, even with my low financial literacy self.
And what I would say, and we dated for a long time. We dated for 3 years before we got married.
We did it longer than y'all did.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I think we did it 6 years. I think 5 or 6.
So I think what that allows you, though, is it allows you to see the integrity in your partner. It even, and I guess maybe that was part of it. I knew that at the time we were having these conversations, I knew enough about his integrity that it felt safe to bet on a future that was us together against the world versus mine and yours and whatever we share in between.
I like that. Yeah, honestly, I'm one of those people that I'm an observer of people, a studier of people, and I still do that to this day. Like inside of the money school, I don't bring people in as guests unless I've learned or observed them or something for at least a year or 6 months with multiple recommendations and like vetting. Even with the in-person event that I had, there was a speaker that I'd known for over a year. And even before I felt comfortable inviting that person to come speak to my women, I reached out to other people that knew them in other settings and said, would you? Because integrity matters. It's not about perfectionism, but character matters. So I say that because before I started dating my spouse, before I actually accepted to be his girlfriend, I already watched his character. And his respect for women was the primary thing. Because in my opinion, that's non-negotiable, right? And not just how you treat me, but how you talk about other women that are not me. Those were so I do really agree with you. Like integrity, character is important, and it does not mean that they're not going to make mistakes, but it gives you an idea of who they are and maybe how they may handle mistakes.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think, in our situation, um, you know, growing up, I I always had this very exuberant personality, and it wasn't uncommon for people to tell me that I was too much, right? Like too just too much, too exuberant, too bouncy, too all of the things, too loud, smiles too big, all of those pieces. And then that carried over into, and I said, I'm going to go on and become a physician. There were actually people that I had dated who were like, I could never be married to somebody who makes more money than me. I could never be married to somebody who's a doctor. All of those pieces. And it was very interesting when I met my husband. We were friends for a couple of years before we started dating, but his idea is like, of course you're supposed to be a doctor. Like that's what you're going to do, and that's amazing, and I love it. And part of it was that he was raised in a family of very strong women, and so there was no reason to ever question ability. Um, and so I think, again, when you talk about character and you talk about watching people show up as their authentic selves, I had that privilege to see that far before, he was the most important person in my world. So
That's good. Thanks for sharing that. So, if someone's watching this or listening to this and they are a primary care doctor or pediatrician or endocrinologist or in one of the other traditional, and I say traditional lower paying because y'all heard me on my podcast. So, even though you're primary care, you can earn a lot of money. And even if you're a pediatrician, you can have a lot of money. You can. But I'm curious, what are some of the suggestions, advice that you would give someone in those historical fields that maybe want more freedom of life and want to have some of the knowledge, wisdom, or maybe attitude surrounding money that you have now had from a combination of different factors, including learning and giving yourself the gift of learning yourself?
I think probably the first and foremost is to understand where your dollars are going. We say, your income may be something that is somewhat fixed, but you have control over how you spend those dollars. Um, and so thinking about things like your housing costs and where that sort of lifestyle escalation really wants, to come in. Especially with that first paycheck. We ended up buying our first house. It was this fixer upper that initially we looked at, we wanted to just keep driving by. But at that time, everything else around it was so expensive that this was doable. And as we got further into practice and maybe our income, my husband had started his own business several times in our transition through training. And so as our income increased, there was a time or two where we said, do we move into a bigger house? And my husband would like to say, this isn't my dream house. I'm like, yes, but it's my dream mortgage, because it was like $1,400. And and because we continued to live at that lifestyle, all of a sudden, as his business started to grow, and we ended up having, I went from my guarantee then to becoming a production model. And so all of a sudden, all what I was taking home was double what I had been guaranteed. Now we had dollars to put other places. And because real estate had been modeled to us, it was, rather than allowing our lifestyle to soak up those dollars as that increased, it was, where else can we make this start to work for us? And so part of that was purchasing my medical practice building. I had the opportunity to do that. At that point, I didn't understand the control I had over my personal practice, but I could see the control I had over our finances, and not wanting to lose anything. that we had gained, because now at this point we'd already walked through that process of having things squirreled away and gone. It's like, how can we put those into tangible pieces that are going to be safe? And that's where some of the real estate investment began. So keeping our lifestyle pretty much the same and taking that excess income and making it start to work for us, recognizing we didn't need it today. And that allowed us to invest in some things that have had really the opportunity to grow more. I think there's that idea that I want to get, cash flowing income that will replace my medical income so that I can scale back. And that really wasn't even something that I even thought was possible. I sort of thought that, I'm going to need to stay in full time, but we can use the dollars to do other things for us. So understanding where your dollars are coming from, understanding what your expenses are, and how can you balance that so that you have more dollars to do other things with. And then what do you want to do with those dollars? Because that's a conversation we could have that could go, on and on. But I think for every person, that's going to be a different decision. But we all can start with, what are my expenses and how can I keep those under control so that then I have some options?
I love that because we have more control than we let ourselves. And I think many times it's easier to act like we don't have control because acknowledging the actions that we need to make can sometimes feel uncomfortable. And I think that awareness is the first step. And then after that, now deciding what hard actions. And we're recording this right now during a week where we're doing our Money Moves challenge. And I was just talking about that with some other women in there, that we have to have that long-term focus without needing to think that we have to eat ramen in the short term. But there's a huge range of lifestyle that we can have. But it's important to make sure that the choices you're making for your life are yours and not cultures or families. People saying things like, you should not be driving that car. Aren't you a doctor? Well, too bad. My choice, not yours. I mean, now I have a nice car, but for the longest, I mean, my RAV4 was like great, working great. That's not what value was to me. My value is my freedom. I'm like, y'all can travel for a year, but enjoy your nice car. Maybe that's their value, right? But the key is not internalizing what the status quo culture has defined. And I think that's something that I'm seeing in you, I'm gathering from you. It's knowing what value really means to you. I call it living the uncommon life and letting your decisions be in accordance to the long-term outcome that you want. Does that sound about right?
It does. It does. And what that actually brings up for me is also that idea, even in our, in our primary practices, recognizing where we have control, recognizing where we have control to set our schedules, set the number of patients we're going to see, understanding what that means as take home, but then also figuring out how that allows us to have balance so that when we're not in that clinical space, we're also living a life with our family that shows the integrity that we want. The way that showed up for me was, initially we had this crazy like rotating day off because it worked with my male partners who wanted to have 4-day weekends to hunt. And I didn't really care about that, but I really wanted a designated day off so that I could show up and read with my daughters at school or take them to ballet or all the little things when they were like cute little people. And what that has allowed me to do now going forward, because I've set that as a precedent, we're talking about living the life or designing the life we want. Now I have this beautiful day in the middle of my work week that is just for me and my additional ventures. And I would say it really has not taken away at all from my clinical income, but the value that I get from that to create these seeds that are going to go forward has just been precious.
Preach, preach, preach. So let's talk about, before I know we're running out of short on time, But tell us a little bit of what you're doing in your coaching community.
So because I've been in independent practice for 18 years, and because I've been a real estate investor for most of that time, and really have been ingrained in that culture from the time that I was tiny, I realized that that was a pretty unique skill set, both the just natural entrepreneurship that comes from owning a practice that has to course correct, throughout those 18 years, and then really seeing the freedom and the opportunity that real estate investing was giving us, I realized that that was a message I needed to share. So I have been drawn to these communities of entrepreneurs for several years, and a couple of years ago, still wanting to try to find my space. I came across the name that really personified me and all of the multitude of things I wanted to do. So this is where I came up with Uncluttered Mind MD. It was this identity that didn't make me just have to be a physician, or just have to be a real estate investor, or just have the other hobbies on the side, the theater, the music, all the things. It allowed me to do all of those pieces. And so then from that really has arisen this coaching community, the Uncluttered Mind MD community, in which I bring together physician entrepreneurs in various places in independent practice. Some of that's DPC, some of that's solo practice, sometimes that's coaching practice. It's just been so exciting to provide that space to really allow those dreams to grow. Right? When we're trying to do that on our own, it can be really isolating. And we may be sort of stuck in that place where we're only thinking of solutions from our perspective. When you bring that to a community and you have people to bounce those ideas off of, you start to imagine what is possible. And I will tell you that over now, it's been about 15 months that we've been intentionally meeting once or twice a month to see where all of these amazing women have gone from those original ideas to where we're at today. It is so exciting. We actually had our first in-person event, Winter Wonderland, in February here in Montana. And there were 9 of us in a house for a long weekend. And it was just this beautiful space of natural conversations and that space to dream. And so we actually have Winter Wonderland #2 that is coming up in January of 2025. So just another opportunity to come and to collaborate. So it's really been my honor and pleasure to just show up authentically as me, with all of the experience and expertise that my life is running. I'm now the president of our organization, of our medical practice. That's 100 employees, 20 practitioners. And so day in, day out, we're always looking at, what are the problems? How do we create that? How do we foster the type of individuals who have pride and ownership? And so that's what I take to this group.
So, so, so good. And for me, it's been great just sharing some of your brilliance, a little bit of it, because I'm sure there's a whole lot more with the world, but also just getting to learn more about you, what you do, your journey. Because sometimes, we meet people and we don't really take the time to have a chance to ask all the questions that I just did. So this has been enjoyable for me. I do have one last question for you. Is there anything that you would like to share with our audience that we haven't covered yet?
I guess the one piece really is one of mindset, and it's to recognize those times when we want to go back and say, could I have done this differently? Where would I be if I had made a different choice? And really, instead of going to that place of shame, really just sit in a space of gratitude for the lessons that we learn. Because I'm a strong believer that in every potential misstep, there is a critical lesson that had we not learned it, we would not be the person that we are today. So I would say that even in those first early years of my practice, when I didn't feel like maybe I took advantage of all of the opportunities, potentially looking at that that nest egg that we had that we didn't take advantage of. I look at all of those as lessons that make our lives richer and fuller and give us a different perspective that we can share. And what I love to say is that every person I meet has a story and has a lesson that I need to learn. And by proxy, the people in my community that need to learn. And that's what I'm looking for.
Love it. So good. And so, if anyone is looking for how to connect with you, how to find your community, where would you direct them to?
So I would direct them to admin@unclutteredmindmd.com. That's probably the best way to get a hold of us. Like I say, we primarily cater to female physicians. We are doing a couple of real estate webinars for people who are interested in learning more about that story. So those are coming up. We are on Facebook, Uncluttered Mind MD, the community. But that's another place to meet us. And so that we make sure that we can invite you to all these things that we're doing. So
It's been so fun. Thanks for coming to hang out with me.
it has been my pleasure. And I have loved watching your journey from the first, exposure to real estate, and now seeing the way that you are impacting women as they approach their finances. It is so needed. And I love the energy you bring to this space and the enthusiasm and the freedom that comes with it. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. So, everybody, there you go. Go find her. And if this has been helpful, if you're watching on YouTube, let us know what your thoughts are. But if you're also listening on the podcast, take some time, leave a review, because it lets me know what you're thinking. It lets other people as well know what to expect. And let us know your thoughts about this episode. Jennie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for hanging out with me. And everybody, we'll see you guys when we see you. Goodbye.